I'm hoping that you came today because you want to learn about flexibility and the skill sets that are kind of tied to that. We're here to talk about like social emotional learning, but like the deep dive into it. So that's kind of where we live within, especially an IEP system. And we're going to talk about disability related needs versus any kind of diagnosis and or criteria area within the IEP system within a school in a 3 to 21 age system. I will use language that is 3 to 21 and IEP based. But I know we do have parents and community and family and community members that join us as well. Know that that is the language and the lens that I kind of show up with these trainings in. But please feel free just to switch the language and go my child instead of student or my client and so forth. We're here to talk about flexibility as a whole. And I was thinking, gosh, we have a lot of evidence-based practices, allows evidence-informed improvement strategies, and a lot of high leverage practices. And you're like, oh my gosh, Katie, which bleh. There was just a lot of what, right? We are required by law to be looking at things that have research and evidence behind it. And what's tricky is merging research into practice and education gets a little wonky. And especially with the newer stuff that's coming out, that's really super neurologically based, which is like my cup of tea. I love it. It is fun, but it's hard to translate into match the kids. So one of the resources that I love to share and that is completely supported by the Department of Public Instruction here in Wisconsin is the high leverage practices in special education from the Council for Exceptional Children, CEC. So I pulled out a couple of the ones that they have, and you're going to go, Katie, these are like common sense. And I'm like, yes, they are. But think about again, how do they show up in my practice? So if I'm thinking about flexibility, I'm thinking that number 13, adapt curriculum tasks and materials for specific learning goals is a great one to think about when we're thinking about flexibility. Being adaptable and showing up for where kids are, especially if you're working within a special education system, you're like literally required to, like it's part of your, the job description should say that, right? So when we think about that, it also applies to how flexible we are in showing up where a kid's at within their behavior output, their response to us, if you want to respect level, whatever it is, right? We need to adapt and then find the path forward to be able to support that kid versus saying, nope, you have to be here, or try to get it more just systematic. The next one I was thinking really matched, teaching cognitive and metacognitive strategies to support learning and independence. We do not explicitly teach flexibility a lot. And you most likely showed up today because the students that that you're supporting or the children you're supporting have flexibility differences, and therefore explicit instruction is going to be key. 18, use strategies to promote active student engagement. If we don't have the student with us on things, and engagement looks a variety of different ways, from a student who might be before words and they're using an alternate communication system or working on their communication system, to a child who can explain everything to you and is able to navigate almost full independence, right? We've got a huge spectrum of how kids show up. But what we're looking to make sure is that they don't need us to move on, right? That we work ourselves out of job and we are working on skill sets to move them forward. That's what we're here for in education. We're not family, we're not, or I mean, you could be a family member, but within education, right? We're really looking at what is the next skill set I can support that child in obtaining so they can be the best them they can be and take the path they want to take or family wants to take. And then 21, teach students to maintain and generalize new learning across time and setting. It's really cool when a kid gets a skill, and with flexibility, this is a really important one. If we're not thinking about how they can use it and that their brain will be able to access it later on, then great. I'm so glad he does it with you. But if he can't do it anywhere else and with anyone else, how does that help him, right? So yes, I'm so glad that he knows blah. But if he can only do that in your room with you on Tuesdays at 9 a.m., we're really not looking at what we need with flexibility and the growth and what that child needs to be able to move forward within their life. Because our brain is not, we used to think it's like a filing system. It's really not. It's this like huge interwoven piece of connections, and every experience gives you connections, and every person's brain is taking those connections and encoding and pruning. So tuning, taking things in and being like, yep, keeping that, or pruning, like, don't need that. Every experience, even though you might be in the same one with somebody, each brain's going to take and get rid of different things. Okay. A lot of the students that have neurodiverse needs, especially at a significant level, which is what our grant is here to support, their brain is coding things in way different ways and might be pruning things they need or aren't even bringing in stimulus that they need, right? Not turning focus or having things come into the brain in all these different ways. So when you have that variability and you have all of these different connections, flexibility becomes tricky when your brain isn't seeing a situation the way the person you're supporting's brain is. They might not be pulling the situation up in the same way. They might be triggering, and why you might see things that look rigid, that triggering that this situation is where you pull all these skill sets up and use. So it is a flexibility, especially with all these connections and the different ways that our brain codes and prunes experiences, can be pretty tricky. But that's why we always have to stay curious and ask ourselves why, because we're going to see a lot of behavior output. We're going to see things that are challenging to us. We're going to see kids that are that look super rigid and can't get off this one task or have to do things their way or being very selfish. Okay. But that's really about what their brain is giving them. And knowing that we have this second layer of our emotional brain, that piece that's controlling whether or not we're regulated, and that our brain is kind of giving us access and ability to make adaptable skills, like being able to be flexible. That's all based on a perception of safe. And SAFE's got a lot of different layers. If you want to dive into that, we have a whole training on it. It's the regulation training and a lot of the sensory training as well, to describe that out. But basically, right, we've got that amygdala that hijacks our brain and says, hey, no, we're going to get you safe. And it could be any kind of safe. It doesn't have to be physical safe. That's the only one of the safeties. It could be academic safety, social safety. When we think about when a student is hijacked, when their emotional brain, their amygdala and hypothalamus are kind of taking over and saying, hey guys, we got to pay attention to make sure that this body isn't going to get harmed. Your brain then puts in as much rigid pieces as it can. So when you're hijacked, when your emotional brain is taken over, when your amygdala is in charge, right? A lot of people get this kind of information through trauma sensitive trainings. Your brain goes to being as rigid as possible. It wants to predict and know what's going on, and it needs to be that way. And so you will have behavior output like a child who is filling every pocket they have with items, well, maybe food, right? Because their brain in some way is triggered that safety within need for nutrition is an issue. So we're just pumping her, he's got like tons of food at home and all that, but he's pumping his coat and his backpack full of food. And we're going, hey, he's stealing food. So now we're trying to fix the stealing food piece and not looking at where his brain is really at. And knowing that a distressed brain is going to be a very rigid brain. And the information that brain is going to pull up for that child to act on is going to be most likely very, very rigid. So when we think about flexibility skills and we look to move forward in supporting somebody who is divergent in being able to be flexible, we have to make sure that we are not only thinking about social and understanding of context flexibility pieces, like being able to, when your friend says, I want to play this game, going, well, I don't want to play that game, but I want to play with you. So I'm going to play your game. So I still get to be playing. Right? That's an adaptable flexibility piece, right? There's lots of social layers. There's also very much fight, flight, or freeze layer that is going on here that might make a child more rigid than the skill sets that they have within their capability. So we look to try to support that flexibility and move forward in understanding all the layers that I kind of just started to introduce to you. And the first one I want to kind of talk about is how layered being flexible actually is. So what I want you to do and how your brain can adapt. I want you to take your right hand. Okay. So you can put your right hand up and I want you to start making a clockwise circle with your right hand. Now you're going to, and I know you can't see my foot and there's no way I could get my foot where you could see it. So you're just going to have to imagine. I want you to take your your right foot, and I want you to make it go counterclockwise. Okay, so your right hand is going clockwise, your right foot is going counterclockwise. And it's really funny because I am actually, because I do this so often, getting good at this, but it is still. Okay, so noticing I had to stop talking to concentrate on getting this done, right? So my speech went away. I'm getting shaky, like my hand is not moving in the pattern that's expected anymore. right? And I tuned you guys out. I stopped looking at you completely and only looked at myself. So my effort to try to make myself be more flexible go against what my brain is predicting. Your brain is predicting that your right foot and your right hand will go together. And so that does that easy. If you do right hand and right foot and you do clockwise together, that's easy if both limbs are easy to move for you. Okay. But when you switch up what that brain expects, it becomes a little bit hard. And the energy it takes divert off of your actual task. I want my hand going this way, my leg going this way. I lost speech, I lost eye contact, I lost attention, all because I was trying to get a goal met that I had it in my working memory, right? That's the other thing. I had to have it in my working memory. It had to be in my conscious brain for me to even get that done. I couldn't just think it and have it go. It wasn't automatic for me. When we think about that brain, it wants to predict this one path and give you nothing else, okay? And anything else takes energy. It doesn't want to do it, so it'll fight you a little bit. Okay. And so when you do actually get the effort to be able to put energy to other things, things decrease. You only have so much energy. So your brain predicts this is what's supposed to happen. This is what I think is going to happen based on information that I am gathering through my senses. Right. It then has to process. Right. And hope for most of us, this is all happening subconsciously. I showed you with the arm and foot thing when we switch it into something in working memory. But for a lot of us, this is happening super subconsciously, right? But then your brain goes and processes how it fits together with others' ideas, right? So it takes in social context, adjusts, and makes your flexibility, your ability to go with the flow happen, right? Then it's got to be able to cope, regulate, keep yourself calm, keep that amygdala saying, we're all good, amygdala. We're good. Just keep me having all my energy towards my working memory or my working brain, my conscious brain, right? So then your brain's got to go through that. And then it's got to be okay with trying another way. Okay. So if you're faced with having to do something different than what your brain predicted, brain's going to give you information. That brain's going to have to then process the information of the social context and the way that things are going. It then has to process it emotionally, right? Your fight, flight, or freeze has to be under control and not triggered. And then you have to have the experiences and ties to have the oomph, and that it's actually just a little bit of the stress response that helps you push past and say, yep, I'm going to try this different way. I'm going to be okay with this change. Okay. And that's happening constantly when we're thinking about kids who are struggling at any of these pieces, right? Understanding the social context, having our body stay calm through adversity or through understanding context, and then actually having the energy and willingness to move forward. That's a lot of layers, people. And when that's broken down, it doesn't happen subconsciously. It's happening all within the conscious brain, which takes time and then often results in behaviors that are challenging to us. Okay. So when we think about that, we need to know that there are a lot of prerequisite skills and skill sets to being flexible. It is not automatic. Let's put this into a kid situation. You have a child who, let's say, has behaviors that are challenging to adults, and he doesn't transition from activities well. And so he's often labeled as selfish. Well, he only wants to do what he wants to do. Well, if we give him what he wants to do, he'll do it all day. He won't do anything we want to do. Okay. I want you to kind of picture somebody you might have met who has been labeled in this way. He's on the computer. It was computer time. They were doing math skills or whatever, Oregon Trail. If you're, throwback to Oregon Trail. I really wish that was something that was still a thing, but I don't think kids know what it is anymore. But right, you're on computer time and it was time to go. We now have to move to physical education. We got to go to gym. Okay. Well, gym in this child's head really isn't a super happy thing for them. But we'll put that to the side, but I want you to know about that child, right? So getting off the computer, that student has to, one, feel safe and okay with having something be done, which can trigger a lot of kids, especially if it's something they're enjoying. And guess what? That's not him being selfish. That's him being human. No one wants to stop what feels good and you like, right? It's not like you're like, oh, well, we call it adulting. Like, I have to stop this because I'm an adult and I have to make the choice to move on, right? I can't just play fishdom on my phone all day. I have to stop and go and do this training. Okay. So we do things and we make choices and we move forward because our bodies can regulate. We have the skill sets, but a lot of our students don't have those skill sets or the resilience in their body to be able to make those changes. So first you got to be able to stop what you're doing that you're enjoying. Okay. Then you've got to process the situation. Actually understand there's somewhere else we're going that, like let's say it is something you enjoy. It could be somewhere, like something good. But your brain has to process that you might be going to something new that's good, right? You have to show up in the expected way to make that move from the computer to the line to go to gym, right? So I got to shut the computer down correctly. I've got to put my headphones away the correct, like all these systems. Then I got to navigate the social world to be able to make the move, okay? All within a state of this is okay and my body's not triggered. There are so many pieces for that. But what we see and what we label in education is a kid who refuses to follow directions, won't do unpreferred activities, right? Where there are tons of skill sets that might just be missing or a gap or just emerging, that if we help support, we wouldn't have that issue. And all those assumptions and bias that we were putting in the original piece aren't really the factors that are involved here. Flexibility isn't just about knowing a path you can take. It's about being able to do it in the moment. Okay. So knowledge and action are two different things that your brain has to navigate. For a lot of us, they move in tandem, and you all have had many experiences where they kind of separate out and like you knew better, but you couldn't get it done, right? Something happened. Ever have a time where you're like had a quick comeback and you thought about it like 10 minutes later, and like usually you are pretty good at whipping things back out and having banter. But you were off that day and you got really upset and somebody said something that triggered and your thing was actually going to be snarky, but you couldn't access it until like 2 minutes later and it was too late, right? I knew what would work and socially shut down the person that made me angry, but I couldn't do it in time, right? So action and knowledge are two different things. When we have kiddos where you hear people saying, well, he knows better, I want you to start asking yourself, then why can't he do it in the moment? What's going on? What's the barrier? This happens a lot, okay? There's a really good definition and understanding about flexibility on understood.org, which is a great website that is super non-education personnel friendly. So it's got language that isn't all education language. It's actually built for families. So it's really nice to be able to get to a lot of the different things that we're all talking about, but in language that isn't all like IEP speak or like the acronyms that we get tied up in, or some of the technical words that most people aren't exposed to that you might be because you're working within a special education system. So know that we have these two pieces and we need to start asking ourselves why, because when we dive into curiosity versus just blame and shame, we got a path we can actually work with kids forward on, not a punishment system that most likely will just cause more stress for us and traumatize children. Two pieces, performance and understanding. There could be a lagging skill or a barrier within those, or an emerging skill that is causing the output that might be challenging to us, or what looks like rigidity. We also come, because our brain is set up this way, with a major negative bias. Let's do this activity. So I'm going to spell a word. I'm going to have you spell it out with me, and then we're going to do that a couple times, and I'm going to ask you a question. So you'll see me point to you when you should be talking, okay? So you should try to do this out loud. If not, that's fine. It'll be more effective for you if you say it out loud if you're able to. So here we go. We're going to spell the word silk. S-I-L-K, silk. Ready? Silk. S-I-L-K, silk. 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 S-I-L-K, silk. 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 S-I-L-K, silk. Silk. What does a cow drink? Most of you are going to have said milk. Cows don't drink milk. Cows drink water. Okay, so there's an example. Our brain had a path, it predicted, it went with it, and it just went, bleh. There we go. Give the answer that I expected, or that it expected. Was it the answer that was needed? Nope. Cows don't drink milk. Cows drink water. Okay, so let's try this again. Pots. P-O-T-S, pots. 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 P-O-T-S, pots. 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 P-O-T-S, pots. Pots. What do you do at a green light? All right. So some of you might have felt like you paused. You're like, I know there's something, right? Some of you might have said, stop. Well, no, if you said stop, we go at green lights, right? The question was, what do you do at a green light? It's go. But your brain wants to say stop. Okay. So you might have paused and then said your word. So we would see this delay in your reaction. Or your brain just gave you stop and you said stop. Or your brain was catching on what was going on really quick and it went to go, right? So lots of possibilities here. Most of the time, we'll see a big pause, right? Your brain's starting to go, whoa, 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 whoa. Wait a second. Something's happening here. She's tricking me. So I'm gonna be able to navigate this and get the right answer this time. But you knew you wanted to say stop. Okay, here we go. Let's do another one. Post. P-O-S-T, post. Post. P-O-S-T, post. Post. P-O-S-T, post. Post. What do you put in a toaster? Okay. Most of you might have gotten quickly to bread. We put bread in a toaster. If you said toast, that's okay. Your brain's still doing that prediction route. It just shows how hard it is to switch things, even though you know something's up here. You know that I'm trying to do this. You know I'm trying to trick your brain. Still, your brain gives you the automatic answer. So even when you have an unconscious thought, your brain still wanted to say toast. Okay? So when we think about that, think about how this just affected you and how hard it was, even when you knew, when you started to know what was going on, how hard that change was, and what are some of the things that happened to you as you were trying to make that change. And what's unfortunate is that our brain will often go with predictions and assumptions that are negative. Okay, so it's going to not predict out good. Oftentimes, it's going to predict down a bad. It's a bad path, or an unexpected path, or an uncomfortable path, which is our negative bias kind of piece. Our brain goes to a negative bias. If you were able to start interrupting, so like when we did the post one or POTS, you were able to take that pause and go, no, it's go. Or by the time we got to the post one, you said bread right away. What's nice is when you start interrupting the system of your brain prediction on things, we can interrupt it, we can change it, and it'll get faster for us. It won't automatically get faster for us, but eventually we will be able to create patterns to change that predictability piece that your brain is doing and make it so that it is evaluating whether or not this is a trick question or not. Okay. But when we think about the negative bias that we put onto children from their actions, right? We assume, we predict out, our brain goes down a path and fills in all of this stuff that we didn't have in actuality, okay? And it might be from past experiences that you've had with the child. It could be just past experiences you've had with you or things you've seen, right? Our brain fills and fills and fills so that it doesn't have to take as much in as is happening in an experience. And so when you hear people saying, well, they know better, or they told me the right thing, they just won't do it. He's being manipulative. That's a big one. He's being manipulative. I really like diving in when people are like, he's being manipulative. I'm like, great. He's got some really good social skills. And I'm like, well, he's a kid on the spectrum. I'm like, okay, so what social skills does he have that he's being able to be manipulative, right? And people are like, oh no, he's really manipulative. I'm like, okay. Does he have a lot of friends? Does he navigate the social world really well? No, that's not there. Then I'm struggling with, because to be manipulative, you have to have an extremely large sense of knowledge of context and also of interaction with people. What can happen is we can fall into patterns, and patterns can be found, right? And they can look manipulative, but we got to dive deeper in that. So if you're hearing people saying he's being manipulative, I want you to stop and get curious about that. He just wants it his way. Yeah, guess what, people? We all do. So somebody might be searching out an extreme way to get it still his way, but that's a human need and a human want, not a bad thing. So we just got to help context matching and helping a student possibly also with his stress response system, regulating through differences, not approaching it, well, there's something I can do with, he just wants it his way. That's a human thing. So yes, he should want it his way. That's kind of how we work. And oftentimes when we do adjust other people, it's because the thing that we want is that relationship with them, and therefore that takes precedence over the thing that we wanted. Okay. And he's looking for attention. Again, human quality. Everyone does. Even the people who hide in the woods have in their head built relationships, most likely with either inanimate objects or animals. Okay. Most healthy is with other humans. I shouldn't say healthy, but I would say the most expected path is creating these things with other humans. But yeah, we all seek attention. Human thing, not a bad thing. Might not match context in the way the student's doing it. Might be in a way that is actually counterproductive to getting the attention that child truly will create within a resilient system. Those are skill sets, not working on shutting down his willingness and want for attention. Because if we do that, that's a really not good path to take. We do not want people not wanting to be interactive. Okay. So we hear these kind of phrases, we add a lot to it. But when we start getting curious of why we're hearing them, either from other adults or having them ourselves, we can actually get to the skill sets that can help support a child being more flexible and not relying on rigidity to move them through their life in a way that feels safe. Okay. And our reactions to this matter, and it matters a lot. So you'll see this kind of broken down that it's an integrated experience, which there's a whole training on just kind of this idea that what we do and how we show up has a major role in how the student shows up and how they react. And so when you have an output that's challenging to you and you're calling it a challenging behavior and we're writing it up and we're doing all these different things, you're a piece of that, or the adult around them is a piece of that. The context is a piece of that. It's not just kid in this situation. And oftentimes, because we react as humans and we escalate sometimes, well, actually, we will escalate with the person who is entering a stress response system, the fight, flight, or freeze. We go up with them, the people around them. Our reactions are often going to be the ones you see on the red side, the ones that might support more stress response system happening in kid, destroy relationships, and sometimes create patterns that are not even conducive to what we want, right? Not that they're helping the kid at all, but they're even things that we're creating patterns for our own self because we get sarcastic with somebody, or we start preaching at them, whether in fight, flight, or freeze, or we judge them for their action, and sometimes extremely unfounded. Okay. So we've got to actually interrupt the system, pay attention to our words and our nonverbals. Our language isn't just the stuff that comes out of our mouth. It's how we show up, our body, where it is in space, how we use it, the context we build around things, the nonverbals, right? All of that plays a role in how we're reacting to children. It's not just about what I said after the child did this, okay? So we've got to think about interrupting some of the systems our body wants to go do naturally, right? Like saying milk and going, nope, I have to actually work on this. I have to, when the child, and don't get me wrong, this is extremely hard. When a child is doing physical harm to you, to be able to take a breath, stay regulated enough to work through it in the best way possible. And I'm not saying you just let a child keep biting you or keep hitting you. And you can say, no, thank you. Oh, right. But if we're going, ow, that hurts, don't do that. And you're screaming and we're doing all these big reactions. We are creating patterns that are often going to either destroy relationship, create more trauma for the kid, create that stress response system way up so it increases, and then also doesn't give us a path forward other than blind compliance. And blind compliance really doesn't get us much of anywhere if they don't have the social emotional skills to understand why that's in place at all. Okay. So we've got to think about how do we flip our response system when a child is being inflexible, or when the child looks very rigid, or they're looking non-compliant, and to better patterns of learning and also better patterns of support. So we are not digging a deeper hole for that child and then climbing in with them, right? You enter a power struggle with a kid, you've already you've lost the war. Power struggles are really hard not to get into because we naturally just want to bust in and win. You enter with a child with neurodivergent needs and doesn't have social emotional competencies at the level that is expected at that time, you've lost. Even if you win the battle, you've lost a piece. So we've got to be thinking about what can we do, because it can't change the kid. You can only change yourself and hope it helps support change in child. So you've got you that we're paying attention to here, not kid. So when we go from looks like, sounds like, that's the effects. That's the way the student's behavior is showing up, and we can see it. Some of the common effects that we might see when a disability related need is tied to flexibility, not accepting others' ideas, right? You have a kid who has to be right, and theirs is right, nobody else is right. Arguing the same point over and over again. I had a student who teacher accused him of tearing up his homework every night. And he's like, I don't do that. And they were, I mean, it was quite a verbal battle back and forth between this educator and this child over tearing up paper. And I asked him, because I then watched him tear up the paper 2 seconds after that verbal fight was done. And I asked him, what'd you just do with that paper? Oh, I ripped it up. It's stupid. We don't have to do homework like that's just stupid. I said, so you're ripping your paper. Do you rip your homework a lot? Oh, I rip my homework all the time. It's stupid. So that was a very rigid language pattern piece, very extreme. Like that's happened, like that kind of rigid pattern language piece has happened maybe twice in my career. But I was like, oh, he saw it this way, she saw it this way. They did not mix. And then he argued and she argued to the nth degree that they were both right. And they were both right. Both situations were the exact same thing. Getting frustrated when even small things go wrong. That has a lot of tie. Students, when things break, ever have a pencil break and the student like loses his mind, like the world is going to end? Yeah, that's real to that student's body. The way the kids are processing these things and the way their brain and what their brain is giving them is very real. So even though you might think it's absurd that a child has that big of a reaction to something, that does not devalue that that body is going through that big of a reaction. Okay, so we got to pull back our thoughts on that and know that even though it seems small to us, that it is not small to them. And it's not about just telling them it's a small thing and get over it. There are definite needs involved in that. Okay, I don't know why Google kicked me out. Hold on a second, guys. See, I mentioned technical difficulties and was like, no, you can't go through a whole training without them. So, ha ha ha. I defeat you even now, Katie. All right, 2 seconds. Hopefully this is an easy fix. And it'll pop back up pretty quick here. Get back down to our slide. Okay, let me just make sure my recording's still going. I don't know why that would have been affected, but we're good. Okay. So, right, like I said, their body's really going through that, and we have to appreciate that and show up for them for how their body is interpreting. Repeating the same mistakes, right? So I know not to do it, but it still happens. Can be a shifting issue. Not following new schedules, having to have it be the same. A student who was like, no, we go to gym now. Well, gym changed now, like it's 2 months in, but they changed all our specialist schedules. So now we're going to art. No Tuesdays is gym, right? And we have this really big struggle. Getting anxious when plans change. I was watching a child one time when the lunch menu changed. And it was this beautiful sequence where the lunch staff, one of the lunch staff, actually came into the room knowing they were going to announce a change in the food for the day and went through with the student what was going to change and then helped him on the lunch map on their wall. I was like, this is gorgeous. Here's a child they have identified with flexibility differences, that body does not process change. And the lunch staff is aware of it. And they knew their change was going to affect him, and they came and they helped him and they supported him through it visually, which was just, I almost cried. It was gorgeous. But there are a lot of students that get anxious when plans change. It doesn't have to be this huge significant anxiety over things, but that is a very common one. And we won't see it in a lot of layers with some of our kids that don't have the big behavior outputs because of it. Our kids who shut down and get anxious and have their stress response system triggered by this, who shut down, are missed a lot, but they are in the same amount of crisis as the kid that picks up a chair and throws it because lunch changed. Okay. Struggling to take on more and more complicated tasks, right? Putting more into your working memory, that is, and your conscious brain, that is your brain's energy level, not being able to be flexible enough to give to it and make adaptive change. And so it might start to get really rigid, and you're going to see a student who refuses or non-compliance. Having trouble switching from one activity to another. Okay, that example with the computer, or being able to get onto a bus, right? Leaving school to get on the bus. And getting upset when others don't follow the rules. We'll see this with students who have flexibility differences in understanding social cognition and social context. Okay, so there's a lot of layers to this. Remember, we talk about social and emotional being the two buckets that we live really, really deep in. All of these things filter in, and it can be a combination of social and emotional, or really strong social differences, or really strong emotional regulatory differences. And they filter down into behavior outputs that we see. This isn't an all-encompassing list, but these seem to be the ones that pop out and people see the most. So now that we know what to look for, like that, we see that, but we're not going to stay here. We're not going to be, oh, yep, he needs to just not be anxious when schedules change. Okay, poof, he's not anxious anymore. Yeah, no, that's not real. We're here to help and support, to have that person be the best them they can be. And let me put this in as we move into what we are going to do to support. We are not here to make them what we need them to be. We are here to help them be the best them they can be, in the idea of the path they have for themselves or their family has for them. Not so that they behave in my classroom. Not so that I don't get hurt, although that is very important. We are always thinking about, yes, I don't want to be getting hurt. I don't want to be having obscene things being yelled at me every day. That takes a toll on me. But I'm here in education to help support that kid so her body doesn't need that anymore. Okay? It's not about us. So if your IEP goals, if the things that you choose to do to support a kid is about you, take a minute and go, wait a second. Let's put this back on what the child needs. What does the child need? Because in the end, it'll be what we need. Okay? But it can't be based on our logistics and our need. I need him not throwing a chair. Of course we need him not throwing a chair. But if we approach just getting the chair gone, and the throwing of the chair, we're not actually getting to the point that that kid's body is getting into such crisis that it's fighting for its life, and it results in throwing chairs. That's a scary place for that kid to be, and a very harmful chemical wise in what's happening inside them. Okay, it's not about us. Yes, we get affected, and that's important. I'm not devaluing that, and I'm not saying that's not a thought. I'm saying the approach that we take needs to match what kid needs, not about us. So let's start thinking about what are some of those disability-related needs that might be the reason why we're seeing all those effects. We're seeing that behavior output. We're seeing the behavior that's challenging to us, right? We've got that sensory modulation, which if you're unfamiliar with that phrase, that's your regulatory piece. That's your body ability to move through the world and stay feeling safe and give energy to different things. I gave an example of rigid language use. The child saw one word that represented this action, and other words, synonyms, didn't match. And so there was a breakdown in language and understanding of that. There's perspective taking. Humor is a tough one. We use humor a lot, and it's a really good thing to use. Kids can get rigid in humor and therefore not bring it in different contexts, right? So sarcasm is a really good example. I'm going to put this out there. This is not a happy thing that a lot of people like to hear, but as an educator, you probably shouldn't use sarcasm. There is too much of a risk for the child and the student, because they are children. Even the ones that are 21, they are still children. Their body or their brain isn't fully formed till 35 with their full frontal lobe. They're children. Sarcasm might work with your friends, and it might make you think you're getting really good relationships. You're bonding, especially high school teachers are like, hey man, this is the way kids talk. Yeah, that is a way that they talk with their friends. We probably shouldn't be using it because there's way too many reasons it can go wrong. It can go right. Way too many reasons it can go wrong. And then if you have a student who is using things like sarcasm or humor and it doesn't translate because they're rigid and it's their body isn't, or brain is understanding context and being able to be flexible within the different contexts, then we start disciplining kids who are using humor and not adjusting, right? So a child who sees friends flicking off each other at the lunch table and then goes and flicks off his teacher, right? Thinking they showed the bird and everybody laughed. So he was trying to joke around with his teacher and his teacher wrote him up, right? Because he wasn't able to make that switch. Controlling worries, anxiety, especially general anxiety, can really show up in some stress response system pieces that we might need to work on or need to support. And when we think about the layers within what we support, we really have this huge spectrum within how we show up for kids. There are kids who are so underwater and skill sets are emerging or are divergent, and their stress response system is heavy at play here and it's hyperactive, that need us to be the most rigid thing on the planet. Need school to be as rigid, because home can't be the most rigid thing on the planet. It's there's too many variables. School has a lot of variables, but we have a lot of control over those variables. Where outside situations, community and home, you have control, but sometimes you have less control depending on how you experience things. And so at school, we can control our supports a lot easier, and there's a lot of staff around to get it done with, hopefully. But then when we look at supporting students with flexibility differences, we have this whole spectrum of working towards explicitly teaching how to be flexible. And the skills you need to know socially and regulatory, emotionally, to be able to access, remember, because they're two different pieces, knowing and doing. So we have to be able to know that we're going to explicitly teach some of these things that we may not have needed to be explicitly taught to ourselves, because our flexibility skills and our resilience skills were built naturally through our experiences, and our brain coded them in the way that was expected by the general public around us. Okay. If your brain didn't do that, then explicit instruction is needed. And we go off of not trying to get rid of behavior, but building skill sets to support a student's movement forward. Okay. And we have to start thinking critically about what we match to show up to support. Okay. It needs to be individualized, especially within a special education system. If you've got divergent skills, which is what we're here to talk about today, and you're within an IEP system, there's an I in IEP. I don't know, we forget about it a lot, but it needs to be individualized. So the strategy that we're doing might be something we do for everybody. And I really like it when we individualize a system we use for everybody if it matches them, right? That's a perfect way to flow. That we need to think critically about the academic need and the social emotional need. Okay. So when we're thinking about context and regulatory practices, that there's layers to that. So does this match our complete need, our goal? We make a goal, not just an IEP goal, but like a goal and within the use of a strategy. And it needs to match, the strategy needs to match what we want to get done. Okay. We need to think about the barriers. What's going to come up that we're going to have to work through? Why don't we preemptively think about the strategy that I want to use? What barriers might happen? And then it needs to connect to the student's culture and environment. And when I say culture, I mean how they show up and who they are. Okay, not are they a Black boy or are they a person who identifies as transgender? Like those are all pieces of your identity, all pieces that a lot of times we go to when somebody says culturally responsive, right? We think about marginalized groups, but your culture as who you are is your experiences and what built that, and all the different layers of cultures that you belong to is what we are culturally responsive to. Okay, but when we think about student culture and we think about student environment, it needs to match like the kid in front of you, the one you know really well because you build relationships because you're a super powerful educator or parent or community member. Okay. We need to stop and start critically thinking about methods that we've used that have stuck around for years that aren't research-based or a high leverage practice and maybe actually aren't so good. And we have a lot of them because school was built way back in the early 1900s, how we do school. And we basically kind of follow the same mode, right? Bell to bell, discipline policies, done. You fit, you don't. Here we go, right? Which is really good if you want to build a whole bunch of factory workers. We do not need factory workers anymore in the way that we think we do, and the way that school is set up to create a blind compliant person who just goes through the motions. Technology has pretty much taken that out for us. There are jobs that are factory jobs, don't get me wrong, but the layers of problem solving that you need and navigation of the social emotional world around you are what keep your job, whether it is in a factory or whether it is on a line or whether it is you are some complicated computer person figuring out why my computer told me that I need to sign into Google again, right? So like no matter where we're at and whatever skill sets you're going, Problem solving and social connection are the skill sets we need moving forward. Social emotional competencies are what people need to get and keep their jobs. Not, I know what 2 + 2 is right off the bat in a second, or I know how to blindly comply and follow your rule. There's layers to need for that, but that is not our goal right now as in education. That's why retrofitting all the pieces we've got going is so tough. That's why I have so many initiatives. That's why we have all this language and all these things and strategies to follow to try to retrofit a basic system of education that really isn't fitting the type of student we need to be able to get graduated and out at 18 to 21 into the community in whatever form that's going to be. So when we think about practices that we have, we need to make sure that we're actually following practices that are effective and that are research-based, not just because we've been doing them forever. And what really stinks is some of the practices we were actually taught in our educational prep programs way back when. And when I say way back when, it could have been last year. So when we're talking about system, we're trying to retrofit, the retrofitting is going slow. So our higher education systems are getting much better, but there are still classes and courses out there that are teaching systems that are not research-based, which is not okay. And in IEP world, really not okay, because we really should be only doing strategies moving forward that have evidence-informed improvement strategies behind them. Okay, so we got to be able to say, I got to let it go. So we got to match kids. But what do we match kids with? So now this is probably like, dude, this is the only thing I came for, Katie. Why did it wait for the last half hour to get to it? Because if you don't understand what we're looking for, you don't have a belief system for it to live in, then it doesn't matter how many strategies I give you, none of them are going to work. So that's why we spend so much time understanding flexibility, a little bit of how the brain works, some of the belief systems that kind of go with it, and then also what to look for and what's it look like, sound like, and changing our way of thinking around flexibility so that we can show up and do these strategies with fidelity. So I mentioned before that a brain in distress becomes more rigid. So one of the best things we can do to help a brain be less stressed, so it doesn't require a level of rigidity that is blocking the access, engagement, or progress of that student, is to become predictable ourselves. And so we can become super predictable and still be novel and exciting within that. And it's not just about making a schedule. You know, people are like, okay, I'll be predictable and make a schedule. So first of all, yes, having a schedule, having a visual schedule is actually very supportive and it is very evidence-based. If you think about it, your visual schedule is your calendar within your work computer or on your phone. You know, like I wouldn't get to doctor's appointments if I didn't have a calendar, right? That visual schedule that I create. In the classroom, sometimes we make really lovely visual schedules or we write on the board. When we think about schedules, sometimes we even write them all out, but then we never reference them. We don't use them. So a great visual schedule, we're like, see, we have a visual schedule. We are, or an agenda, or whatever visual you have to say what's actually happening in the timing isn't evidence-based unless you interact with it and use it to support predictability and understanding. So I love when I walk into an early childhood room and they have this beautiful schedule and it's not followed in any way, shape, or form, but man, is it pretty. Like, why do we spend so much effort in making it if we're not going to use it? And then having a visual schedule that doesn't actually match what we're doing, it's a little counterproductive. Now, you're like, Katie, things happen and schedules change. Yes, they do. Have a plan for the change. So if I have this beautiful schedule that I have up here, I have strategies and methods that I have told and made explicit to the people in front of me how they work. Just like that lunch attendant came and had a system, a visual system to show that child how the lunch menu was changing. She had a plan for when that schedule, that visual schedule of what was going to be eaten that day had changed. Okay. And it was very clear because he knew the system when she came in. He knew because he was a little agitated when she came in because it indicated there was a change. They'd had used that system in before. It wasn't, she just came in and said, hey, we're changing food. Like they set up how to get that done. So order of activities, showing visually, having it be predictable. You can be a free-flowing teacher within a system. So if you're like, I don't flow like that, Katie, I can't at 10 o'clock be like, we're just starting math. We get to math when math happens. That's just fantastic. Then have a system to know when things are very clearly beginning and ending. So a student knows that we're moving from one piece to another in a general order. Okay. You don't have to have times. Times aren't required to make a visual schedule. Visual schedules can happen in many, many different ways. And for some reason, I don't have my example of a visual timer that you can do without time. So basically, it's like X's on a board. And you go, okay, when all 5 of these X's are gone, this reading is going to be done. And so as I go, I'm erasing X's. And we're going, and I'm like, oh, we're halfway through. So I've got 3 of the X's gone. And then, right. And so there's no timing in it, but there's a very clear beginning and ending visually with the X's that I had on that dry erase board. You can be predictable in the types of activities you use. So the mode you use is the same, but the content is different. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the unique learning system. It's a visually based system that is supportive of students who have are before words and are learning communication modes. But what it does is the lessons are the same. And so the visuals are the same setup, but then the visual itself is different. So, you know, like if we're talking about doing letter sound matching, the printed letters are the same. The mode of matching and the way we're going to match and be able to do that lesson is the same, but the lesson type is different. So it's animals this day, or it's dinosaurs another, or it's, you know, like buildings or whatever. It's the visual changes up, but the system stays the same. The strategy, the lesson stays the same, the core. Morning meeting is a good example of that. Typically we do morning meeting, which you can do a morning meeting from 3 years old all the way up to 21 in different ways. I saw a high school teacher do this beautiful morning meeting that was all wrapped around CNN and news, right? So you don't, you know, morning meetings for early childhood. No, it actually is a research-based practice for every single person ever. Like that relationship building process is a really good one that has content layered into it. Morning meeting, you might go and you might do all the different things in the same order. You might have the calendar, the discussion of dates and things are the same, but the things change, right? Like your holidays or your days or your weekend, whatever your discussion is. So within your strategy or your lesson, your content changes, but the predictability of how you do it stays the same. So you can be novel while still being predictable. And the last one, which we have control over, is our language use. So Love and Logic talks about how repetitive language can be very supportive, especially in de-escalating somebody. So if somebody's in crisis, they're really losing it. When in doubt, take your language out. Like take your spoken language out. Okay. And if you need to, because you're a person who needs to talk, say the same thing over and over again. I got you. I'm with you. I'm with you. Or I'm here for you. Or, oh, thank you. That was the phrase I would use when physical harm would happen to me from a child. Oh, no, thank you. Oh, no, thank you. Right. And then I would go to, I'm here. I usually said, I got you. And now that I think about it, I'm like, oh, I got you could be taken wrong. But I used to say, I got you. I'm here for you. I'm here. I got you. Make your language patterned. If you have a student who needs to rely on our rigidity, on our prediction, make the phrases you use to transition the same every time. Not, okay, guys, we're going to line up today. Well, let's all get to the door. We're going to the gym, right? Line up for gym. Line up for gym, right? Make your phrases the same, which is nice to know when you go to make a visual for phrases, because making visuals is a really nice evidence-based practice. Your first thing is to do the thing you say the most, right? People are like, I got to make visuals for all this stuff, for all these cues. Nope, the things you say the most. Have a visual for it, especially if we're talking about transactional supports, having a student be able to be supported moving from one space to another and not having stress over it, or having as least amount of stress as we can give them. So we can change up and we can have not change up. We can make ourselves as predictable possible in the order of things that we do, in the type of things that we do, and in the language that we use. Okay. So it's not just about, do I have a visual schedule? There are lots of layers of how to become a predictable system or a predictable person. The next thing I really want to stress, explicit instruction not only is an evidence-based practice, is also a high leverage practice. It is, and you're like, Katie, yeah, that's just teaching. But I want us to think about how many times we actually think about all of these layers. Modeling, right? There's also the phrase, I do, you do, I do, we do, you do, right? That's explicit teaching. That's the core, right? So we think about it, it's modeling, showing how is this actually happening, giving them the answer, letting them see what's expected. However you're going to look at this. Then there's the practice that we slowly work ourselves out of. And then there is independence and trials for independence in a supportive way, that failing isn't bad. Failing is a part of the learning. Okay. So supportive, positive, and independence. If we're not looking at all those three things and the modes that we use, we're probably going to hit some barriers, and most likely won't have success. I am stressing that we're going to need to do these things for flexibility skills. Now I'm going to show you, and I don't put this in the chat and I don't put it on the website anymore because I don't want you to think that these are the only resources out there that teach explicit skills and flexibility. And I also want you to know that each resource, each product you ever buy has a lens and is based off the experiences of those who made it. Therefore, it's never going to be perfect. This one is an executive functioning one. It's called Flipped 2.0. This is the second book. I just heard the writers of this one speak, and I really like their mentality and their thought process. They weren't totally on the, like, they had a little fix-it kind of mentality to it, but I think most of us, we come from the medical model. It's hard to get off of it. But there are some really cool lessons within this, but also some really cool explanations. And flexibility is one of the running themes to that whole entire resource. So if you're like, hey, I don't even know how to explicitly teach flexibility, there's lots of product out there, as long as you know that the lessons you're getting from that product need to match kid and need to match the mentality that kids aren't broken and we're not fixing them, right? We were looking for support. We're using this in a supportive way, not in a fixing way. But modeling, showing, hey guys, this is what I'm talking about. Having practice, that's supported practice, right? Scaffolding. If you haven't done a training on prompting and how to actually fade prompting, highly recommend you do that. There are lots of modules out there. The Affirm modules, AFFIRM, it's linked all through my website everywhere. Has a prompting one that's really good. And prompting is research-based, right? But scaffolding, prompting, differentiation, right? That practice piece is all about how we are backing ourselves out of this, people, not about us being this huge part in it. And then getting to that independence, because they leave us at 18 to 21 and move out into whatever situation they're going to do, college, career, community, supported work, living environments, right? We're not there with them anymore. There's no self-contained McDonald's. So we got to make sure that we are thinking about where they go after us, because it's not about us. It's about them and helping them be the best them they can be. So I was talking about some of those strategies that we can adapt and do in different ways. So you can have high leverage stuff that's kind of in your mode of how you do things. I know that I'm going to teach social behaviors that match context. So I'm going to teach what other people are expecting. I'm not telling you you have to do it. So we really got to switch our social skill teaching into awareness of what is expected or what is thought of in the other person's brain. Expected might be a stronger word than I would like to use there. You need to know what you don't know. And a lot of our kids, a lot of the social stuff is hidden to them. So we need to help them understand what is in other people's brains so that they can navigate the way they want to. Not, you have this skill you have to learn so that you fit in, right? Fitting in is a choice, and fitting in is a comfort level. And fitting in, if you don't have the information to say, I'm not going to do that, that's not okay with me. We need to know what other people are thinking or a general idea of the path so we can make a conscious decision to be what and where we want to be by using things like explicit instruction and then teaching those cognitive skills. So this is age appropriate, right? So it is until about third grade, and third grade is really kind of the lower end of things where we start getting cognitive thought as a general human race, okay? That your brain is starting to think about your own thinking and really starting to layer in. That's why we see the social patterns of kids and how they interact in friends groups changes a lot by third, fourth, fifth grade, right? And then in middle school, and it's like a cluster. And then we get Breakfast Club once we get to, if you're familiar with that movie, that mentality within high school, okay? And then college, we get to start choosing our people in a way that isn't supported by forced location. So when we think about teaching cognitive strategies, that's the mentality of like mindfulness, that if we know, then we can actually put things into working memory, into conscious thought, and work on it. So when I asked you to start moving your hand in a different way, right? I asked you to pull things into your conscious thought, right? A metacognitive, I'm thinking about it. I'm processing it, and I'm able to make a change as a result of it. Okay. Some of the evidence-based improvement strategies that that match, if used correctly, to gaining some flexibility skills. If you Google Affirm modules, you will find modules on all of these evidence-based practices. So if you're like, Katie, I have no idea what scripting is, you can go and you can watch an hour and a half module on that practice. Okay. And the Affirm modules only have practices that are extremely high level evidence-based. Now you're going to be like, Katie, I went into it and it says autism. Yes, the funding that created those modules all came from a resource of looking at the research based on people with autism. But when you think about autism, autism is a human thing. So when we're matching, like one of these things like self-management isn't an autism thing, right? It's a human thing. So it matches. And self-management is actually one that is actually researched in a lot of different disability areas to be an evidence-based practice with a lot of evidence through the lens of that evidence-based group or that lensed group. But what I like about Affirm is that there's tons of research behind it. They show what it matched, what age groups it matches. And so you can't really go wrong unless you're not matching a kid. So for example, there is one on picture exchange communication systems, lots of research behind that. Doesn't match lots of kids. There's a very small population that picture exchange communication systems would match. And so you've got to use that critical thinking on whether they match. All these ones would match any kid with these flexibility differences, okay? So to a layer, they still have to match kids' culture and environment too. Social narratives, scripting, video modeling, which is basically social narratives, but in video form, visual supports and self-management are some of my favorites and some of my go-tos when I think about I want to move forward in flexibility. The things that I showed you with these books are ways to do individual lessons in those, and actually most of them use some of the principles in these evidence-based practices, okay? Especially the visual support one and the social narrative one. So that's kind of the layers of like, okay, now I know the kid has a flexibility difference. What do I do, right? I've labeled it. I've got it down to, I'm not thinking about it as a behavior output. I'm thinking about skill. I'm thinking about what do I do to help the skill, right? We think about our high levels practices, how I show up and making sure that I'm doing it explicitly and the areas that I want, like flexibility. I think about evidence-based practices like modes, like social narratives or video modeling. And then I can use product that have individual lessons or things that I pull off that match the use of those types of things. So that's kind of how I process it in my mind when I start to build what I'm actually going to implement in front of child. Okay, well, let's dive into the ones that I really like. Social narratives, a form of social narratives. So social stories is a evidence-based practice that is a copyrighted thing by Carol Gray that has a very, very, very in-depth process in which it does. And a lot of people think they're doing social stories and are way off from what the research actually says. Okay. So that's one, I just want to put it out there. One type of social narrative. Another type of social narrative is a social autopsy. So that's when you're sitting with a student, and it doesn't have to be about what the student experienced. It could be like, I loved seeing a speech pathologist used Full House, clips from Full House, and she would do social autopsies on different characters within Full House. So it wasn't what the student was going through, but it was typically something similar so that we could do it outside of self, right? But we're looking at what happened. We're evaluating situation. We're looking to see where the social interruption or the social failure happened, okay? I like saying social interruption because sometimes the interruptions aren't always failures. Sometimes they go in different directions. So what caused the interruption and not to follow a path that your brain expected? Who in this situation was affected by this social interruption, okay? And then we start brainstorming what could be done, what could have been done differently, what paths could we have taken, what things contribute to maybe not having somebody affected by it. And then making a choice. If I was cousin Jessie, what would, what could be what I do next time? Or what could I do to help repair the social relationship that might have broken a little bit, okay? So we can do this outside of self. You have to have a really good relationship and a child who has a language system that is strong enough to do this with you, to be able to do a social autopsy and have it be productive moving forward. The thing that I want to really stress with this is it's not about correcting the kid. It's not like, nope, you did this and you should have done this. That's not what this is about. This is about having the kid evaluate what is the context. What do they see? What's their brain noticing about what's happening here, and who it's happening to, and how that's affecting them. Not, you shouldn't have flicked off your teacher. What would you do next time? That's not what this is about. Make sense? Okay, because that's a big thing. We go and we start correcting, and that's not really following the mentality we really want to do and building a kid to be the best that they can be. That's trying to fit them into our system. The next one that I mentioned is visuals. Visuals is an evidence-based practice. What you see on the screen is a change card. So it's an explicit path to go through a change, right? So I've seen teachers use this for when the principal calls like a prep rally or something random during the school day, and we know of it in the morning, so I can fill out this card and give it to the child. I can have ones that have really soothing pictures on them, like especially if a kid has a special interest, like like Super is into Sid the Science Kid. So Sid the Science Kid is on this card and is saying, hey, we're going to have this change, right? And it's going to happen like this. This is what we're going to hope. And I can get help in this way if I need it, right? There's lots of different ways you can make a visual change card, but you're making what they're going to have to process visual and based, so that it takes a layer of language out of it. It's not all this talking, but also is something stable they can hold on to, and might be a regulatory piece that will come in handy. The next one, the tree, is represented if you've ever done a decision tree. So you start out and you say, here's my goal. This is what I want to do. Okay. But there's a lot of ways to get to this goal. So I start, and where am I starting? I'm starting, I'll give an example of a student who stopped showing up for school and didn't want to come because he had his own lawn business that he created that was doing pretty well. And I am not quite sure, but I'm pretty sure he was making more than his mother was in the job that she had. Okay. So his lucrative high school job that he created, and he made this whole system off of a bike and everything, and had like just amazing. Made it so he had a job that he could live off of. So high school he didn't need. I don't need a diploma. So tell him, well, you need a diploma. Nope, I don't need it. He was right. He didn't. He had what could be, now not long lasting, there was a lot of layers to health insurance and all those things that we could have gotten into. But in his mind, it was very logical that a high school diploma for him wasn't needed. So they had to do a decision tree on, okay, well, here's your outcomes of what you want. You want to be able to have this lawn business be successful enough to sustain you, and you don't want to have to do classes anymore, right? Here's how we might need to go through some classes to get what you want to really happen. And so each path on that tree, and there was leaves that he could take off onto, right? Because it spans out. I've seen this done in highway mapping too. It's just making a map, but it's basically going, we can go this direction. Like if you leave school right now and you don't have a high school diploma, then filling out your paperwork for an LLC might be difficult, right? This class will actually help you fill out your paperwork for an LLC so you can start paying taxes so that you're not in tax fraud, right? So showing all those different paths that are going to their goal, and then showing that there's lots of different ways to navigate that we have choice in that, and that the layers of, you just need to do this because it needs to get done, like getting a high school diploma. No, you don't. Lots of people don't get high school diplomas and they're just fine. So that is trying to fit people into our system, where a decision tree is a visual way to help the child's brain process the steps it might take to actually reach the overreaching goal they have, and all the layers that might be involved in that their brain didn't have access to or didn't know about, because you don't know what you don't know. And then there's another one that wasn't mentioned before, but is the one that you can do a module on, is cognitive behavioral intervention. So this one, there's lots of different forms of cognitive behavioral intervention. Mindfulness is one. Dan Siegel's Name It to Tame It, right? When you can put language to something, it's easier to regulate through it. Mantras are research-based practice that are cognitive behavioral intervention. Basically, anything you're going to use your brain to think about to be able to move yourself forward, okay? Cognitive picture rehearsal is a great one, right? I'm going to picture myself on a beach, and that's going to soothe me, right? If that works for you. Lots of different things there. So when we're thinking about cognitive behavioral intervention, it does take a layer of language, and it's not spoken language, but a layer of language and understanding. So how your brain really processes the representation of concepts. And like I said, that really starts to metacognitively think about your own thinking, start around 3rd grade. Before that, we're just kind of modeling. Okay. But it's also another really cool practice that can be really useful for students who show up with this need, because flexibility often takes a lot of cognitive working memory to be able to gain skills in. Wrapping up today, I am hoping that you have thought and found something that you are awesome at. And I said something, you're like, I already do that. Super cool. I'm so glad that confirmed something in my practice. So I want you to put that in your head right now. Something that you do that what you heard today that you're like, yeah, I totally do that. And it's in my practice. And I'm so happy that Katie has confirmed that it is like a good path to go down if you're on board with listening and believing what I say. So get that in your head, because now what I want you to do is I want you to think and commit to one action, not a bunch. If you wrote a bunch of things down that you want to do, I want you to pick one. One thing you commit to today, either to take out of your practice, enhance a practice you already have, or put into your practice that resulted from what you heard today. So coming off of this feeling of, look, I know I do things that are awesome, I want you now to think of one thing you can do moving forward, because you can come and listen to me for 2 hours and have fun and smile and get some information. But if we don't actually make an actual action, then it doesn't go very far. So commit to, in your head, put it on paper, one action that you're either going to take out of your practice. I'm going to stop doing this. You're going to put into your practice. Ooh, I'm going to start doing this. Or enhance something you already do. Like, you know what? I bet if I just did this like this, we would get closer to the evidence-based practice that I thought I was doing. If you ever need me, my email is in the chat. It's in the PowerPoint. Email me. I'll have a chat with you. I'll Zoom. We'll have a personal chat if you didn't have your questions answered today. Know that I'm here for you. So have a good day. And I'm hoping that what you were seeking in coming to this training today was filled in some way, shape, or form. If not, email me and I will dive into whatever you need to get you what you need. Okay. Have a good one, guys.